Ambassador, thanks so much for your time on Bloomberg Television and having us here in the Beijing Embassy.
Pleasure to be with you.
Really appreciate it. Obviously, things in the Middle East right now are quite fluid. You were there with Chuck Schumer and the other U.S. lawmakers who were here last week, where Mr. Schumer basically urged Beijing to use its influence with Iran, perhaps to de-escalate the Middle East and the Gaza war. Have you been happy with the level of response from Beijing, and what else would you like to see from Beijing?
President Biden spoke for our country during his extraordinary trip to Israel, and he spoke very plainly that the United States stands by the state of Israel and the Israeli people, that we condemn Hamas violence and terrorism against Israeli civilians and the Israeli state, that we must support humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, and the president announced $100 million in support to the Palestinian population in both Gaza and the West Bank. Obviously, Senator Schumer, when he was here, the majority leader of the Senate, called on China to show sympathy for the loss of life of Israeli civilians and to denounce Hamas terrorism. And we would like all countries, including China, to denounce terrorism by Hamas. And it's obviously would like all countries to support the Palestinian people, as the United States has done with this very sizable announcement of $100 million in support of the Palestinian humanitarian needs.
But in the framework of U.S.-China relations, do you see this as an opportunity to improve relations between Washington and Beijing, or does it create further challenges?
You know, we have a lot of challenges in the U.S.-China relationship. We do not have identical views on this particular position. Hamas does not support the two-state solution. Hamas supports the destruction of the state of Israel. China has taken a position of supporting the two-state solution, as has the United States. And so obviously, the focus here should be directed against Hamas.
Where are U.S.-China relations right now? We've had a flurry of diplomatic action and arrivals here in Beijing. We potentially have a summit at APEC in San Francisco, not confirmed yet. Where are we right now?
Where we are is that the United States and China have a complicated, often difficult, sometimes contested, competitive relationship. You know, we are competitors when it comes to major security issues here in the Indo-Pacific. We're competitors on technology, and we've just taken more steps this week, additional steps to restrict the sale of American dual-use technology that could give a military advantage to China. We're certainly competitive on the lack of a level playing field for American businesses in this nearly $700 billion two-way trade relationship, and we have major differences on human rights. Americans value fundamental freedoms for individuals of speech and assembly and press and religion. So those differences tend to, in often cases, dominate the relationship between the two countries. But we also try to engage, and President Biden and President Xi agreed last November in their Bali meeting that when our interests align, we ought to be working together on a cooperative nature. So on climate change, on the battle against infectious diseases globally, on the battle against fentanyl, and drugs, drug trafficking in the world, and certainly on food security and the food insecurity produced by the war, Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. Those are issues where we seek to work with China.
In your dialogues with the Chinese, are you getting any indication that that summit in San Francisco will happen? And because of the issues at hand right now, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's the ongoing 20-month war in Ukraine, and all these other economic issues which have not been resolved and seem to be sticking points, all the more critical that these two leaders meet next month?
What we have done over the last 5 months is begin a process to create cabinet-level channels between the two governments.
Has it borne fruit, though?
I think so. I think it's been useful because immediately after the balloon incident last February, we really didn't have a high-level, sustained, cabinet-level contact between our two governments. But that started to change when Secretary of State Tony Blinken visited here in June, when the Commerce Minister of China, Wang Wentao, visited the United States just before. And then Janet Yellen, our Secretary of the Treasury, came. John Kerry, our climate negotiator, was here. Gina Raimondo, our Commerce Secretary, came here. So you saw a real commitment by the United States to deepen those channels. And then Jake Sullivan, our national security advisor, and I joined him for this meeting, had 2 days, more than 13 hours of conversations with Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, and we've just had the first congressional delegation in 4+ years. Senator Schumer, bipartisan delegation, 6 senators. So I think where we've succeeded is where we didn't have that sustained high-level contact, we now have it, and that's fundamental to any difficult relationship like this.
Are relations warmer, though? Because still the export controls continue to be a major push by the Biden administration. We had just in the last few days a tightening of those restrictions to Chinese chip design companies, and also closing loopholes for potentially the use of third nations or affiliates of those companies that are procuring those advanced chips or technologies, closing off those loopholes. I mean, is there concrete evidence that China's been using those loopholes to get around the export controls?
Well, the Department of Commerce announced those further export restrictions this week because they were warranted, because there were loopholes, and the action that we took a year ago in October 2022 had to be updated. We are serious about preventing any kind of military advantage to the People's Liberation Army here because of the export of advanced dual-use American technology. When Secretary Raimondo was here, she spoke to this publicly and said this is non-negotiable. The United States will not compromise on our national security, and we've made that clear to the Chinese leadership. I have made that clear in many meetings.
Is it resonating, though, with them because they still see de-risking as decoupling and limiting China's rise? I mean, I know Janet Yellen's message was that the chips and the advanced technologies only constitute a small proportion of trade between the United States and China. It doesn't seem, at least publicly from the Chinese, that it's necessarily they're buying it. What is Wang Yi and others telling you directly?
I think the message from the United States, Steve, is beginning to resonate. We have made abundantly clear from President Biden and Secretary Yellen and all the rest of us that we are not seeking a decoupling of this enormous bilateral trade relationship between the United States and China. China is now our 3rd largest trade partner, nearly $700 billion in two-way trade in 2022. Yeah. And we have thousands of American companies operating here. We have nearly 1 million American jobs depending on trade with China. So we intend to continue with a major trade relationship with China. But we have said, and this is the small yard, high fence, the de-risking strategy, that we are not going to permit the sale of advanced semiconductors, AI chips, into China that could be used for military advantage by the PLA. That is a very important exception to this, but it only constitutes, as Secretary Raimondo said, about 1% of that $700 billion in two-way trade. So I think we've been able to make progress here in helping the authorities to understand we want to continue a broad-based economic relationship. There will be an exception. And by the way, Steve, the Chinese also restrict the sale of certain technologies to the United States. They also restrict Chinese outbound investment into the American economy. So de-risking is happening by both sides. I mean, it's the right policy for the United States.
Is there enough wiggle room? Has the Biden administration built in enough wiggle room to give some concessions to improve the relationship if there is a summit in San Francisco, whether it is the Trump-era tariffs or it doesn't look like they're backing off on any of the export controls?
We're not in the business of granting concessions. That's not part of what we are seeking to do in this relationship. We are two powers that are competing in many ways, economically, militarily, technologically. We've had a series of high-level meetings, and I think there'll be other Chinese ministers traveling to Washington in the coming months for high-level meetings. We need this kind of interaction, but the United States is not going to fundamentally make concessions just to have meetings.
Do you see an escalation in activity, military to military, perhaps incursions, encounters in the waters above the South China Sea? I know the Pentagon has just released some previously classified photos and videos of some very close encounters with PLA aircraft. Do you feel that this is perhaps a strategy coming from Beijing, a new strategy as a provocation? Do you see that? Do you see
our militaries are operating in very close proximity to each other in the Spratlys and Paracels in the South China Sea, in the Senkaku Islands of the East China Sea and in the Taiwan Strait. We have long believed that we need better and deeper military-to-military channels so that if there is an incident or a misunderstanding, we can deconflict. And the Pentagon did announce this week, and you saw the press conference from Admiral Aquilino and Assistant Secretary of State Eli Ratner, that we think the Chinese have been engaged in dangerous encounters with our aircraft in international airspace. And we think that should stop. And that's a message that we've been giving to the Chinese leadership at a very high level.
This week they've had the Belt and Road Initiative, the Belt and Road Forum. Obviously Vladimir Putin is here, wanted by the International Criminal Court for alleged war crimes. What do you think? Would you agree with the likes of the EU's Dombrovskis, who essentially says this is reputational damage for China to be associated, as the two gentlemen talk about finding an antithesis to the U.S.-led world order?
I don't think this relationship between China and Russia has done China much good. For instance, in Europe, where there's been a profound reaction against, and in the United States, of course, against Vladimir Putin's illegal, barbaric war in Ukraine. We warned the Chinese 9 months ago publicly, as well as privately, that they should not provide lethal military assistance to Russia for the war in Ukraine. We don't believe they've done that, but we're watching that very carefully. And as you know, we've sanctioned some individual Chinese companies that we believe have contravened U.S. law on the sale of technology to Russia. So it's an important issue, but you've seen the reaction. Both NATO and the European Union are now terming China a systemic rival, in large part, I would say, because of their support for Russia in this illegal war.
The U.S. also sanctioned China's top general, Li Shangfu. He has gone missing. Do you have any intel as far as where he is or what his position is?
I have nothing to offer you on that.
If he has been sidelined, does this offer the United States an opportunity to perhaps engage with another individual who is not sanctioned, and that mill-to-mill dialogue, which is critical, can resume? Are you optimistic?
China shut down our 3 principal military-to-military channels following Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, which we supported, by the way, 14 months ago. We believe those channels should be reopened at every level, at the working level, at the commander level, and certainly at the ministerial level. That's been our consistent position all along, because the last thing that we should want in this relationship is the absence of communication that would just add to the difficulties we've had in having a straightforward conversation between our military leaders.